Okay.
Recording.
All right. So we are here for another doula talk. If you've been following me on Instagram, you know that I mostly do this on Instagram Live. But for 2020, I'm shifting everything over to my blog and YouTube channel. And I'm very excited because today we are interviewing the Glow Maven herself, Latham Thomas, who has just been doing extraordinary work in the birth community, especially for women of color. So today we're going to be talking about holistic health, especially as it pertains to Black women, and how we can use holistic health to combat the current crisis that is happening. So welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time and the space to come on and chat with us. So first, I just want to start off with a little bit about you. Can you tell us, how did you get into birth work? How did you get into holistic health? Was that something always within you, or did it kind of just sprout out of nowhere?
Olivia, thank you so much, first of all, for just having me and for using your truth telling and your platform to speak about motherhood and your experiences in motherhood. I remember I first came across you because other people were sharing your work through posts and sort of the raw authenticity that you were sharing about your experience as a new mother. And so I just think it's important for us to have access to a variety of stories and for us to be able to tell our own stories because, as we know, so often people have told our stories
Yes.
and we haven't been in charge of our own narratives for so long. And so being able to use these tools like Instagram and like your YouTube channel, for instance, allows you to continue in that vein of honoring our ancestry and also helping women with the path forward. So so thank you. And my journey really started with I'm from California, I'm from Oakland. Everything is like, the legacy of the Panthers. There's just like a resistance sort of in the air, and sort of the water we drink. And so I think for me, growing up and studying like herbs with a master herbalist when I was like 7 years old, and kind of having that background and bringing that to college, and being able to kind of, when I went to Columbia University, study visual arts and environmental science, but also plant systems and botany, which also provided a really strong foundation for being able to do like, herbal work. And so for me, in my formative years, it was really about like, making tinctures and salves and cough syrups and all types of things that we just used to remedy ourselves and that we saw as completely normal, right? Like it wasn't like, oh, let's go to the doctor. I was like, no, go to grandma's house and boil down them orange leaves and,
Yeah.
so it was always like something like that, like remedies and trust of the community first, and trust of our resources, our internal resources um, for healing. And so that was sort of the foundation. I would say that, alongside that, when I was 4 years old, my mother was pregnant with my sister. My aunt was pregnant with my cousin. And then my great aunt was also pregnant. And so all of them were pregnant at the same time, due 3 months apart. And so as a 4-year-old, it's astonishing to see anyone pregnant because, first of all, you're just like, what's happening? This is cool. You have an understanding and a facility of, language. And so everything to you is like sci-fi and cinematic and beautiful, right? And so of course I saw the experience as being one that was really powerful, really beautiful, but also for me it was transformative because as a child, I mimicked what I saw. And so my cousin and I would like stuff little Cabbage Patch dolls under our shirts and like pretend to deliver each other's babies. And so that's kind of how it was, rooted in for me. And I think another thing that was really positive was that my mother always talked about the body in a very positive way, in a very sort of just like informed way, like it was never like, oh, here's all these pet names that you can use to describe your parts. She's like, these are the anatomical names to describe your parts. And so I remember once she always tells the story that we were in a store And someone was like, "Oh, that's so cool. Your mom has a baby in her tummy." I was like, "No, my mother has a baby in her uterus and it's going to come out of her vagina." And they were like, and she's like, "Yeah, she's fascinated, sorry." But it was like, because of her teaching, right, that really helped me to have an understanding that our bodies are magical, they're sacred, they're powerful, and also nothing to be afraid of. And I think that what we've come to see culturally is that the opposite is taught, right? Like, our bodies are like an accident waiting to happen. They're like a place that we shouldn't be safe in. Every ad that's out there, every magazine is telling us to mistrust our bodies or to try to find a way to like enhance our bodies because we're not enough. And so I think that through the work that we do, right, as birth workers, as wisdom keepers, as healers, like, we help women to reclaim their bodies as sacred. We help women to really settle into the truth of who they are and not be you know, like living in sort of the superficial neuroses about what we're supposed to be. Like, it's really about like confronting those ideals and doing that through the work, right? So I think that was for me, sort of how I came about it. It was like kind of seeds were planted along the way, as a child, and then sort of in my adulthood, and certainly with my experience in my pregnancy with my son 17 years ago, because he's 16 now, and living in New York City, that was a huge experience for me to be pregnant here away from my family, and have to navigate that without the internet, without social media, without tools that make things so much easier now. We had to do it like, word of mouth for practitioners, talking to people, interviewing folks. And thankfully I was able to find an amazing birth center and deliver my son there, with midwives. And that was transformative for me, because I think a lot of people, what I've seen, people come to this work through trauma. Some people come to this work because the experience was powerful for them. And for me, it was one that was positive and powerful, that was enough to impact me, to say, I want to like take the leap to be of service, right? And like 20 minutes after my son was born, I made that commitment to everybody in the room. And so then I sought to kind of do that after.
Wow, it sounds like it was almost like an initiation. Like your birth was like, okay, like we're initiating you into this work now. And I think,
1,000%.
yeah, I think a lot of women feel that kind of initiating energy after they have their baby. And I wanted to pause for a moment and touch on something you said about us not trusting our bodies and kind of being at war with our bodies, kind of like an accident waiting to happen. And I know that a lot of teenagers probably resonate with this, because it's like they're being thrown all this information about don't get pregnant, like by any means, take any precautions, take any drugs, take any chemicals, do not get pregnant.
Right.
How do you think that psychosis of being in constant fear and constant disharmony with your physical body manifests with reproductive health?
I mean, I think the correlations are so clear, although we don't spend enough time studying it or even really connecting the two, right? Like the mind and the body. I think so much of scientific medicine is focused on evidence-based research in theory. But what we know is, in the actual practice of it, we do not see a lot of things evidence-based that are actually being put into practice. So I think the scientific community, or I should say the medical community, leans on evidence-based, but often practices in ways that have been proven not to be safe or proven not to be true. I would say that, there's a lot of things that are important that we don't have metric for. And there's a lot of things that we wouldn't consider for study that are critical to understanding why things happen, certainly with women. And so when we think about our bodies and their responses physically and what's happening, like anytime there's a response, it's a hormonal one, right? And we know that the hormones are governed by our emotions. And so when you think about your endocrine system, it is completely dependent and entwined with your emotional body. And so that means that also your emotional motor system, which is controlled by your nervous system, is also deeply entwined. And so that means that when I have a response, whether it's fear, whether it's a traumatic experience that sort of like amplifies fear in me, or pain or tension, that all of that contributes to a physiological response, and one that then also sort of primes me for the next time I experience something like that, to close off, to shut off blood flow, oxygen flow, energy flow to that area of my body. So what we have is like people really holding on to traumatic events in their tissues, right? Or experiences in their bodies. And what that looks like over time is the manifest of disease or dis-ease, right? And so that shows up as cancer, or as fibroids, or as uh, bacterial vaginosis or vaginismus, or yeast infections. Like, it comes up as so many different things. Endometriosis, right? Like, all of this stuff is connected to, and I'm not saying that it's all traumatic, but it's all energetic, right? So experiences do prime us to hold on to things in our bodies, and our experiences have a very peculiar way of lodging themselves in our tissues. And so if we don't process that through a holistic approach, because it cannot just be like, oh, I'm just gonna like take medicine and it's gonna go away. It has to be that I do self-reflective practices. I move my body. I'm eating the right things that work for my body at this time in my life, or this time of season, or this time of my cycle. I'm getting the rest that I need. I'm engaging with, the pain that I hold, or the traumatic experiences or events, even my grandmother's, you know what I'm saying, that are lodged in my body, that I came born with, or I'm in dialogue with, the people I'm in a relationship with, or the things that are sort of like taxing me. You have to kind of look at it like all of the areas and how they are affected, and how they affect on you, right? How they actually affect your reproductive life cycle, because everything is expressed, like everything about our health is expressed through our reproductive system. And we know ovulation is like one of the vital signs, just like your pulse is a vital sign.
Yeah.
And so to have optimal health, we really need to make sure that like we're syncing our bodies with the seasons, with the rhythms that like are happening around us. Like, we're in the middle of winter right now, and it finally got cold in New York City. And it's like, it's an invitation to slow down. It's not an invitation to go out, hustle, layer like 10 pounds of clothes, trudge through the snow on your period. It's like, no, sit down and rest, and drink tonics, and and broths, and eat hot foods, and or you just had a baby, like stay up in the house, you know what I mean? Like, not pushing ourselves. And so I think that so often, yeah, we don't look at or listen to the signals of the body, but we also don't listen to what our mind is even telling us, like, yo, I don't feel like doing this. And there's always this sense of like responsibility or obligation, right? Like, oh, I should go, or I have to do. We have to get over that, because especially women of color who, our work makes so many things possible, right? Like, if we don't show up for certain roles in life, we know that like sometimes it feels like things will fall apart. We know that if we don't show up for this person or this family member or this, it's like it feels so much more heavy, the consequences for us, than like our white counterparts, right? Or because also we're taking care of people even when it's not even our job, right? So we're taking on so much. And so when you think about self-care and how it's been popularized in such a way and talked about in such a way that like it's like you're bubble bathing away your problems, it is like so critical for women of color and birth workers, in particular, since we're talking from our point of view, to be doing this work, like the self-care practices are for us to sustain ourselves, right? And to be in dialogue with what's happening with our bodies, and to understand, like, I feel something is happening through me. I feel this thing coming on. I wonder what that is. Not like, oh, you show up to the doctor and they're telling you shit that you don't know. Like, we should be in dialogue with our bodies, right? Not trying to shut off the signaling and the information, but like be listening to it, so that when we do feel something's weird, we can just go get tested for stuff, and then our what we were feeling could be probably, proven through diagnostics, right? And so that is kind of, for me, how I look at things, like, not to sort of wait till I feel something and like push myself to the limit, but like, my back hurts, okay, let me do the baths, let me do the massage, let me do, the self massage, let me move my body. Like, think about ways that you can care for yourself before you feel broke down, right? And not getting to that place of getting broke down. I think that that's just something that we've inherited, like, that we just push until we can't anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that's been, I think, beaten into us, ancestrally, and obviously, like, literally physically into our ancestors, to push until they could no longer produce, right?
Yeah.
And so there's part of us that still, I think, carries a legacy forward, that is bound in trauma around, like, production and productivity.
Mhm.
And if we feel like we're not doing enough, like, we push ourselves to the limit until we can't get up the next day, and then we're sick, or then, like you said, like, there's this sort of almost denial that something's happening until we have to end up in the hospital. Like, we have to really be thinking about, like, the day-to-day maintenance of showing up every day to the office of self-care, right? Like, every day I show up and I ask myself on a moment-to-moment basis, like, what's needed here? What does this moment call for? Not like, oh, I feel super, super, super tired, okay, now I'm gonna listen, or like, I've fallen asleep in the, like, at the wheel, or like, you can't get to that point, right? So I think it is like um, you know, a rewiring around, like, the listening, right? Like, us learning to listen better to ourselves, and actually knowing that we deserve to listen to ourselves. Like, we
Yeah,
deserve to actually have the quiet
it
to
is.
sit and be like, what do I need? Because I can hear what everybody else needs. And guess what? Everybody is so quick to ask you what you could do for them, and put onto you what they need. But rarely is somebody saying, like, what is it that I can do for you? And rarely, when they ask that question, do you even have an answer? Because
Yeah.
we're not asking ourselves, what do I need right now? What would feel really good? And then when we do think about it, it's like, oh, I don't want to burden this person, or I don't want to, like, we start to talk ourselves out of even being in that dialogue, right? Then we won't even ask for the thing. And it could be something that could honestly change you. Like, it could have been like, you know what? I need somebody to come take my kids.
Mhm.
I'm exhausted. Like, you know how many people probably want to play with your kids? You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, so just think about, like, the simple things, and how, like, a little bit goes a long way. And I think that for our health, a little bit really does go a long way. So if we could start thinking about how many years it takes of abuse of our bodies to get to a place of illness,
Mhm.
and think about how much love we have to, like, put onto ourselves and speak onto ourselves
Yeah.
to undo what we've done over so many years of mistreating ourselves, right? So I think it's a dance, and I think that we have to model it as birth workers and wisdom keepers for folks who are around us at different stages intergenerationally. We have to model it, and for the youth, because otherwise they don't know how to take care of themselves if they don't see us, setting boundaries and prioritizing ourselves, right?
Yeah, I think there was just so much there that we could unpack. It was so much, but I want to point out how all of what you just said really points to, in my opinion, what we're seeing with the Black maternal mortality. And I know that there's so much implicit bias, there's so much
Yes.
institutional racism,
Hmm.
but at the same time, there's this other side of the coin where I'm seeing the headlines about racism. I'm seeing the headlines about women not being listened to, but I'm not seeing the headlines about how do we undo this ancestral trauma. And on
Hmm.
top of that, it's when we say ancestral trauma, I feel like our minds automatically go like to, you know, the 1700s, the 1800s. And it's
Yes.
like, well, what about the trauma that your grandmother, your
Mhm.
great grandmother? I remember the first time my mother had said something to me about the Jim Crow era, and we were
Mm.
riding past this lake that I grew up around this lake all the time, and there's like a pool and a whole like park, and she was like, "Yeah, I remember when at the pool there was a water fountain that said blacks and a water fountain that said whites." And I was like,
Mm.
what? Like, I thought that was like 1,000 years, like it felt like it was 1,000 years ago, just because of the way things are not like that now, so
Mhm.
blatantly segregated like that. So when she said that, it was like, whoa, like this is really close. This is our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, like
Mm.
not that far removed from this intense amount of trauma, and we're still being traumatized. So I do want to talk about the Black maternal mortality crisis, but I want to hear your perspective as far as Black women taking the lead on their own health and
Mm.
being able to realize that, yeah, I can hire a Black home birth midwife that's amazing, but I
Mhm.
still have work to do on my end.
Yes.
What does that work look like for people who
Mhm.
know I have trauma in my womb? I have trauma in my tissues. I watched my mother and my grandmother work themselves into the ground and then take out their anger and their frustration on me as a child.
Mhm.
Where do we start with that
Mm.
to
Yeah.
to process that and heal from that?
Yeah. I mean, naming it like you just did is so powerful, I think, and is the first step to understand that, like, a lot of the things that we sort of bond around as adults, when we talk about it, we're like, that was abuse. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of these whippings were unwarranted, and a lot of things that we sort of suffered as children that we all feel like we commonly share. These are trauma bonds, right? And I think that's one piece. And yes, like, I think our parents did what they could. A lot of them did the best that they could and raised incredible human beings that went out to do excellent things in the world. And the excuse for like beating us was like, oh, they turned out to be great people. There's a lot of kids that weren't beat that turned out great. A lot of kids that were beat that went to jail. So it's like, let's stop putting our hands on our children in a violent way, because that also is connected to institutional racism. And we know that the institution of slavery, of chattel slavery, like the way that they kept slaves in line, because in some places, especially in the South, like South Carolina, places like Florida, the population of enslaved people what like exceeded the population of white slave holders. So the only way to keep people in line is to abuse them, right? Is to exert control through mass violence and stuff, right? So this has been since the inception of this nation, this type of work, and we know that this was happening also in other parts of Europe. So it's not like it was unique to the United States. However, for us to kind of, I think, change the legacy, we have to see like where are we also living in our trauma, where are we also sort of repeating a lot of the uh, practices and stuff that were really critical, I think, during that period in terms of how people operated. You know, I remember when my son was born, and his father and I, we talked about how we weren't going to put hands on him in anger. We were like, we're not going to hit him. We're not going to spank. And for me, it was like, whoa, like I grew up in a household where my mother spanked, my dad did not. And I feel much more comfortable and safe with my father in terms of telling him things because of his even keel. I could tell him anything. His voice will never change in terms of like, he's always steady. And my mother is more, I'd be a little more afraid to tell her certain things because I can't really tell how she'll handle it, right? And so I think as a child, you start to figure out like, how do you move through the world knowing that there might be a volatile response from this person, right? So that is part of, I mean, things like that, like simple things. Doesn't have to be that you were abused. It can just be even just the way that you were brought up and things that were normalized also, you know, affect how you function as an adult and also how you might interact with your children or other people. So I think that's one, is like really naming these things that got normalized, and really calling them what they were, forgiving the people who or at the hands of our harm, right? So who was the person who harmed you? If you do know who those people are, and if you can name them and name what that harm was, and do a forgiveness practice, like in my book Own Your Glow, there's like these beautiful forgiveness practices that I have in there around, like, you know, other people, around ourselves, and around those that we've harmed, because it's really important to free yourselves from the shackles of resentment, and of, you know, because resentment's really a mantra, you know, when that we kind of tell ourselves over and over. When you think about like the folks that you think about, the family members that you don't talk to, you don't know why you don't talk to them, or why we ain't talking to this one or that one, and it's like behind one little thing, and it spirals and it becomes like this mantra, like over and over. Yeah, I don't talk to this one. Yeah, we don't mess with her. We don't mess with her. We don't talk to her. And that doesn't need to happen, right? But that also is connected to like trauma. Like, I was hurt, I'm shutting you out. But you can't do that to family, right? And we do that so much in our community, but also it's so we've suffered a lot from family separation. We suffered a lot from, we think about the things that happened that our ancestors had to endure, you know, around not just the separation, but, you know, think about being separated, then being forced to, you know, sleep with a slave master, right? Then have to bear his children, you know, then have to, you know, I mean, like nurse, wet nurse, you know, the mistress's children, right? With your milk that was made for your babies, right? Like, think about the horrors, like the daily horrors that were acceptable. And people want to know why Black women don't breastfeed at the rates that they should, you know, when we are obviously targeted as people that they don't want to be breastfeeding. We're targeted as people who they want on diabetes medications. We know that the top ingredients in formula is high fructose corn syrup and other sugars, right? That will set our children on a path towards diabetes, you know, at age 7. So it's like, we know that they formulate these products to make us become long-term customers of medical products, right? So it's not about like empowering us, and it's not about, because we don't need empowerment. We have self-determination, right? As a people, because we've been doing what we've been doing since the beginning of time. Everybody's trying to figure out how we do it. Everybody's copying us. Everybody's trying to be us, right? And so it's like, we don't need that. What we need is for people to get out of the way, and systems to stop functioning in ways that inhibit, limit, or are a detriment to our health, right? And so, and that would be so simple, right? If the people that operated into these inside of these systems also changed. Because the only way that we can change what we see happening in terms of the maternal health crisis, in terms of just like our health in general, and reproductive justice, is a conversation that we're having about like every step along the way, right? From menses through menopause, to understand like what is happening to us, you know, all of the harms that have occurred reproductively to us. We have to have a broader conversation. It can't just be about like one issue. It's a multi-layered issue, and it affects us, and it's not being discussed in all spaces because nobody wants to unpack the fact that a lot of folks, you know, were responsible for, you know, experimenting on Black bodies, you know, for the benefit of white women's reproductive health, right? And that's been happening since the 1600s and 1700s. So I think that when we think about, to get back to your question, we think about like our healing, it like nobody's showing up to do it for us. Nobody's going to say like, oh, Black women, you all have been woke for 400 years, like take a nap, like let us help you. Like nobody's going to say that. People are going to continue to use our brilliance. They're going to continue to siphon what they can out of us, take what they can without compensating us. And until we don't longer exist, right? Like people will do that until you're dry.
Yeah.
You know, I remember hearing this thing. It was said, like when America gets a cold, Black people, oh no, when America gets a sniffle, Black people get a cold and Black women get pneumonia.
Mm,
And when you think about that in terms of like the existential stress, of being, of the lived experience of being a Black person,
mhm,
the trauma that they've equated to of Black women just living their lives, that their stress levels and their brain scans look like people who have lived through combat,
mhm.
right? So to think about like, what does that say about like your health when you go into a pregnancy? What does that say about your health, period? We're not measuring the right things. And then we're also blaming Black women for the fact that these things are happening. And so the system's blaming instead of saying, okay, like, what are we doing wrong? It's like, well, they're not doing this or they're not doing that, or what about this, or nutrition, or all of these things that have nothing to do because they're minuscule in comparison to what is actually occurring, that people aren't working fast enough to address. If this was, white women are dying too. Like, let's not get it twisted that, it's only Black women that are dying. Like, it's like 12.4, white women per 100,000 live births. That's not a lot, but guess what? For us, it's high. Now, if we think about like, how do we, or sorry, it's 12.4%. If we think about like, how do we adjust this? If it was white women at the crux of this crisis, we would have figured it out. So
I just want to say yes. I was like this close to going on Facebook and saying, "Dear white people,
dear
with
white folks,
you dying, we would have figured it out. This would have been in the history books already if it was white women dying at this rate." And I stopped myself because I said, I don't even have time today for the onslaught of why has it got to be about race? And
because it is about race.
you're right.
It is. Like, if it weren't, we wouldn't even be having this conversation today. It is. And people don't want to face it because it's uncomfortable to talk about like death and like wrongful death and death that like should never have occurred. And you think about like, well, how is it? And people say, I can't believe it. No, I need you to believe it because it's happening. Not I can't. You must believe it. It's happening. And I think that, but again, it's going to take us to gather ourselves
Yeah.
and come to use our own resources together to support each other to get through. Nobody is showing up. Like, nobody will come. And I think this idea that like, oh, like policy will come and help us, or this candidate's going to do this, or nobody's coming. I think the sort of I think the if you think about like the mind frame, I think about Harriet Tubman, and I think about like how she didn't sit there and say like, somebody's gonna come and like save us from this. She was like, nobody's fucking coming. I'm going, and this is what we're doing, right? Like, we have to be in the like, nobody's coming, it's on us. Because if somebody shows up and like something happens, fantastic. But like, we have to move as if nobody's showing up, and then we have to do this work ourselves. We have to unbind ourselves. We have to heal ourselves. And that's why I'm so I'm such a big supporter and avid, promoter of folks who are doing healing practice, who are engaged in healing modalities, who are working within their communities to heal. Because if you think about it, like, those who have been affected by trauma, who have lived through pain, have amplified skill sets around healing. And I find it really important to work with people who come from these legacies and traditions of the practices that they're sharing as well. So if you're going to go and see a shaman, just go to Peru. You know what I mean? Like, go work with them. Don't go to somebody who did 2 weeks in the jungle and is now like leading their own retreats or whatever and charging like $5,000 and teaching medicine from a culture that they don't even come from, right? Like, think about that. And then also think about like the wisdom of women of color and Black women and what they've gone through, and that of course they would be powerful healing vessels to work with and to seek for support, because not only do we come from people where, you know, who were deeply spiritual, but we're encoded with African ancestral technology. So we have access to this already, right? So I think that it's like, we know people steal it from us. And I think we have to reconnect with it and know that it's ours. And that's why I'm so passionate about, like, really us using our tools. You know, a lot of people don't know that, like, acupuncture got popular in the United States because of Black Panther Party. The Panthers had what they call the survival programs, and they popularized acupuncture and had that free in the community. They were the ones who brought you know, breakfast into schools, in the public schools, so that we could eat, right? And the breakfast programs were replicated across the United States, and there's a federal program now for school lunch, right? But that was because of the Panthers. And so there was a lot of things that we don't attribute to our community-based work around healing, around self-determination, that we need to remember. And even yoga, yoga was in all of you know, yoga became popularized and taken from the people, but this was something like, I mean, like yoga in Black communities back, you know, that you see now, and people are like so proud of themselves to bring yoga to us. Like the Panthers brought that to the community. Okay, so like this is not new, and we already have our own practices, our own movement practices, and things that we can engage in. And I think, you know, Queen Afua is an incredible healer, you know, 4 decades worth of healing work in the holistic, you know, women's health and womb healing. You know, I think when we think about like just looking at this lens of reproductive health, you know, Queen Afua is a wonderful resource for that. We're doing an amazing gathering together on March 27th in New York, she and I, and it's going to be intergenerational. It's for mothers and daughters and sisters and cousins and, you know, nieces, but friends also, to come together and to support each other and witness yourselves through healing. But yeah, we have to do it ourselves. We just have to do it ourselves. And we have to know that inside of our community lie the resources. We don't have to go all these other places and buy this stuff that's been repackaged and sold back to us. It's our own stuff, right? Like, trust yourself, trust your practices, lean into like your own ancestral technology. Ask, what was you guys doing, you know, after you, like, what were your postpartum traditions? How are you doing with the breastfeeding? Was I breastfed as a baby? Like, ask these questions and start to sort of requilt your stories and imagine what's possible for healing. But it can't happen outside of ourselves. It's not going to be some people coming in to teach us. It's us tapping into these things ourselves. And I think journaling is a powerful tool as well, because it allows you to get things up to the surface. I think sister circles and, like, you know, on a new moon and full moon are really powerful. I think retreats can be great. But I think stuff like this, like being with folks who are conscious, you know, and who are having conversations, and who are maybe your elders in a certain, you know, sort of space that can teach you, is really important in helping to change a legacy and unearth some of the things that you've been holding on to for so long. Therapy, you know, which is something that I think Black folks are starting to embrace in a big way. There's huge conversations happening around it. Also really important, I think, the therapy thing too, and figuring out, you know, who you can talk to, because we just do need to talk to people. We have so much going on, and unfortunately I see way too many people using Instagram as their therapy tool. Ain't nobody on the other side except for strangers. So like, find somebody that you can trust, that you can speak to, and that you can, you know, unearth this stuff, and also be able to have accountability to process it and like integrate yourself into the world, right, after you open yourself up. So I think all that's really important, and that you just have to find what works for you. Like, there's no plan or no right or wrong way, but I do think that as you start to, you know, explore, that you really start to figure out what works for you. You really start to figure out what resonates for you, right? And that's what's so important. Like, our people, evolved like that, trying things, integrating things. We're very inclusive people, right? We pull everything together. I mean, we got gumbo. Is it like, look at a dish like gumbo where everything is in the pot, right? Or look at something like, our music, all types of instruments, that we use and retooled to make our music, which is now being coined as American music, jazz and blues and soul and R&B and rock and all these things that we brought through our pain and transformed into something really beautiful. So I know that if we use our bodies in that same way as instruments, right? Like for truth and for healing, that we can sing on the other side, when we process our pain and then transform into healing, we'll be able to also use that to bring peace into the world, but also to help elevate our brothers and sisters and folks who are in this work with us. And especially those who are in service of birth work, you have to be in constant dialogue with this work, because you will be depleted. You will be otherwise, burnt out. Or you'll also feel resentment. A lot of people feel resentment too, because they're not recognized for their work. They're underpaid. We're in a profession where people don't value women's work, and so we have to stand up and claim that for ourselves. But we collectively have to do so.
Yes, together. And I want to just kind of link some things you said together to further emphasize them, because like you're dropping a lot right here, and I think people are not gonna even catch everything that you're dropping. And then after that, I have a question which is gonna kind of take us off of my original plan, but that's totally fine. So at first, you back a couple gems ago, you had said how there's this kind of disconnect in our communities where we see the bonding, the trauma bonding of the pain that we experience growing up as children and just existing in this paradigm of post-slavery, post-segregation era. And it really brought to my mind the Willie Lynch letter. How it was foretold to us that, even long after the shackles and the torture and the separation of families, when all of that has dissipated, we will still be able to control you so efficiently you won't even be able to see it, because we're going to pin you against one another.
Yeah.
And within and I also hear you saying that in order to do something about this maternal mortality crisis, we have to take the power into our own hands, not just addressing the outside issue of institutional racism and the implicit bias, but the inside issue of racism and bias and how that is trickling down through each generation.
Totally.
What I'm seeing in the birth community so much is duplicates. We've got all these people doing the exact same thing in their own business, in their own little corner, with their own Facebook group, and their own this. And I'm like, why are we not just doing this together as one big, massive force of energy? We're all trying to do it on our own so we can all have our little bag. We can all make our little coin and say, oh, I did this. And it feels almost counterproductive, because then we're burning ourselves out from trying to do it alone. And I heard this, I believe it's the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together.
Yes.
Every time I look at the doula community at large, I'm like, we would go so much farther together. And just again, to emphasize what you're saying about the key to this issue in a lot of ways, from our side, from the side of the Black woman being what's the word, taking her own power. The key is the healing. The key is the energetic healing. I want to say that again. The key is the energetic healing. It's not just about eating right. It's not just about drinking enough water. Regularly to the doctor. Like, you can do all of that stuff and still be harboring trauma and emotional cycles in your tissues. And even going back to what you said about like it being wintertime and we're kind of cycling through the seasons and we're constantly being asked to check in with ourselves to see, what do I need in this cycle? What do I need in this season?
Yeah.
That for particularly Black women, I feel that we almost look down on the idea that I am a cyclical being and I need different things at different times. It's like our construct of a Black woman is like, I'm always on point. I'm always going to be there on time. I'm always going to have everything I need for my chip. And it's like, hold on a minute. We can be successful. We can be taken care of. We can be all of those things, but still checking in with ourselves through those cycles and saying, okay, I can be this, but not right now. Not today, not this week, you know?
Yeah.
And that's powerful. I wanted to ask you, because you brought up the idea of going to a shaman versus going in, and it's funny because I see this conversation coming up a lot about just different healing modalities, like especially with the rebozo. You know,
Yes.
we've got the appropriation of the rebozo happening left and right. But what do you feel about doula work as it pertains specifically to Black women? Do you feel like, and I'm biased, and my bias is gonna definitely come out in this question, but do you feel like the commodification of birth work has begun to degrade its overall effectiveness? And what I mean by that is, we've got these different certifying organizations.
Oh yeah.
And there's no regulation of what really makes you certified. Is it to read this many books? Is it to learn these different comfort measures? Is it to go through a initiation of learning how to heal? Do you think that this kind of widespread, like, doula-ing as a business type of motto has in some way impacted the quality of doulas that are out there? And especially, I know this is a big question, but especially for people who want to become doulas, who are very like anxious, ready, like, let's go, let's sign up. Like, you probably know the organization that I want to say, but let's go sign up for that training, and it's only a few days, and then we'll be a doula. Like, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a few things that I think. So one is that, I really want people of color to, and particularly women, because we're the ones who really have held on to so long this sort of like imposter syndrome, or a sense of like not being enough. And so we really need all the accolades and all the like titles behind our name and stuff to really feel valuable. So what I would say is, I believe that a lot of these regulatory sort of bodies have found a way to sort of push us out into the margins. Because here's the thing: when you think about like all the wisdom, it came from people of color and folks who were doing this work, right? All the birth workers were people of color. All the birth workers, when we arrived, before we arrived here, when shackled in darkness, passing through the waters of the Middle Passage, we were delivering each other's babies in darkness. To arrive to these shores and to put to use the tools of our ancestry, to put to use our midwifery tools, to put to use, their herbs and things like that. Like, by the way, people knew they were being taken, so they brought with them sorghums and seed with them, right? So it's like there was a foresight that I think our people had, and so when they started to, just decide that, what I should say, when gynecology and obstetrics wasn't even a thing yet, was a nascent sort of area of medicine. They had to use lay people, midwives, granny midwives, and bring them in to teach them what they knew, right? Once they were done, they built all of these entrapping systems of certification to pin them in, and then legislation around that, right? So all of these ways to push people out. So now we got what we needed. So basically we infiltrated, we got what we needed, now we're pushing you out. So that's colonization, right? So we've taken what we need. Now you're on the outside and we're considered the best option, right? And this is obviously over hundreds of years. This is obviously tons of propaganda that has been used, because even still to this day, people still have distrusted midwives, right? Because this is hundreds of years of undoing this good work, and also tons of legislative pressure and chipping away from people's rights, right, to give birth the way they would like to. So you have that, right, already. So then when it comes time to, really try to wrap a, I don't know, lasso around this work that people have been just doing in their communities, an organization decides to start the history from when they entered the fold, not from whence our people entered the fold with this work, which has been documented. Instead, they want to start it from their point of view. It's white centering, and then basically create like a system whereby you have to go through there, teach through there, the information is whatever. So it's like that, to me, creates a homogenous type of experience for everyone who does it, but also creates homogeny in the workforce. So we don't have a variety of different types of doulas if we only have that model. I think that we need people from different backgrounds and organizations to bring their wisdom, their way of teaching, so that you have different types of options in the marketplace, right? Like there's not like one type of sneaker, right? There's so many things to choose from, right? And today I want to run, so I got a running sneaker. Tomorrow I want to hike, I got a hiking shoe. Like, you need the variety. You need people who have been trained in a specific way to work with through your needs, right? So I feel like also the idea of creating these systems to where there's also a monopoly makes it so that a smaller school or organization isn't seen as valid, or isn't seen as a good option for you, because they choose to not be involved with this particular organization to certify, so that they can operate outside and say, we have a different set of values and a different set of a different curriculum and a different sort of belief system around this work, and how it should be accessible to all, but also so that we have also we think differently about what certifies someone, right? So I think that that's very important, to have multiple types and not like a standardized per se, because then I think we're getting into using patriarchy and white supremacy as a foundation for codifying value, because that's what this is, right? When you think about it, it is basically saying, if you've been doing this work as an auntie or a sister or grandmother for however long, but now you didn't do the training, you didn't do our training, and you're not listed with us, that you can't be a doula? No. So to me, it's like, we need to, there should be, yes, like some general kind of sense of what we all agree the work should encompass, but there should not be like, this is the teaching that everybody should do. This is the learning that everybody should, be studying. This is the reading. Like, I mean, there are books that we suggest to people that I have never seen on a reading list in my years as doula, right? So I think it's important to have that. I think it's important to have new voices. I also think that it pushes institutions to change, because so many people are out here with their own trainings and their own things that they're doing and building, and it's scaring larger companies and larger organizations, because they're like, oh shit, like we have to be agile, or we have to get a Black president to like, help us clean up our image, or we have to change, talk to people about like what our curriculum entails and maybe modify it or something. They weren't doing that before, when people weren't going out on their own or when they didn't feel a threat. Now there's a real threat where people are like, no, I can just go over here and learn from this woman of color, or learn from this group of people who are centering our experiences. Because I have to tell you, like, it feels so good for women of color to come and say, I see myself in this material for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
And I've been a doula for however many years. And this is the first time I'm seeing myself in the material. Or this is the first time anyone said it like this, or anyone brought the ancestral tools to the play, or anybody, talked about like the scope of our healing as part of this work. Like, it's not just about sitting in a classroom and learning how to like, basically be a non-judgmental presence of support. It's about learning how to process through your healing and having a gifted facilitator to create ritual around this work. It's not just learning stuff. It's like you are born with the ability to do this work, and then you are called to do it. And so some of us answer the call, some of us do not. And when you answer, you should be met with tools that enrich who you already are, and you should be brought into an initiation, right? It is not about like going to a class, right? So we don't do it where you just come in and it's a class. It is not a class. It is an experiential transformation. It is a transformative event. It is an initiation. And so we have to be born into the work and continue to do it when we leave. I see that as super valuable, and really like people find what works for them. There's going to be other trainings where someone's like, I just want to like get the information. I don't want to feel anything. Cool. Then go over here. But you should have options. And so what I kind of get upset about, is that there's this idea that, oh, well, they're not aligned, or they're not listed, or they don't. No, it's a choice to not uphold this system that is basically designed to keep us, by the way, under a certain umbrella and under someone else's. Like, who said, like, how do you get to judge? Who decided that you were judging? You one day decided that you were the certifying body, or you decided that you were the one who could judge. One day you did that, right? So why do you get to do it? Because you have more time, right? So, and then there's more respect over time, right? And there's belief, because people who also, carry white privilege, but also people who are affected by and carry white supremacy, who are people of color, believe in these things too. So if we believe in these institutions, right, then they can exist. And if we decide like we believe in ourselves, we can build our own institutions. So we have to stop like, putting all of our power over to people who have not historically supported us, who have not centered us in the work, and who have not apologized for the harm that has been caused as a result of erasing us in the work that we were so critical in developing in this country. I mean, this entire nation, has Black women to thank for the advent of obstetrics and gynecology in this country, like for all the medical advances in this country. So like we should be a through line in that work. And so, and also there should be, if you're going to teach in a way that is respectful, then you should be able to see like who's teaching this. I would like to see who's teaching, right? If there are no people of color teaching, what experience are you going to get? Especially if these people are not doing anti-racist work. Like if they're not really like challenging their systems of assumption, then what are you going to get from that, right? But again, we so believe like somebody else has something to teach us that we don't trust ourselves and the lived experience of people in our own communities as enough or as powerful or even better than some other experiences we could have. That is very important. We have to and all of us do it, right? Like there's all kinds of things. It's like, oh, I'm gonna buy this from this person, but then your girl has it and it's like, oh, I don't want to pay that, but like you pay more over here, right? So we have to examine it. We all do it. We have to examine it, but I do believe that there should be variety. There should be, because again, then this really pushes us into the realm of legislation where we start to legislate against doulas and regulate doulas, and then it becomes like, well, what is it that is qualifies as a doula experience, right? Like how can you get reimbursement for that? And then when you think about reimbursement, it's like, how do we make sure that doulas are getting a living wage? Because as I see it, nobody wants to pay us already. So it's like, now we're going to have the government like standing in and saying, here's what this is valued at. We have to really be in a dialogue.
Of what already happened.
Right.
So at first we're going to take the power from you. We're going to claim it, we're going to repackage it, and then we're going to say you can't have it. And then now with that was with midwives, and now we're seeing it with doulas. Like, okay,
yes,
we've got all these huge like white-owned certifying bodies, and those are the people that we're going to say you can certify through, and then the government is just going to like kind of draw this line in the sand. And it's amazing to me that people don't see history repeating itself right in front of their faces. And as well with the midwives, what I'm beginning to see is both doctors and midwives having very distasteful comments about home birth midwives, CPMs, direct entry. And it's like, well, if you don't have a nursing degree, well, what can you really offer? Like, and this is coming out of the mouths of midwives and Black midwives. And it's mind-boggling to see how, again, it all goes back to the energy. It's mind-boggling to see how we can't trust ourselves and our people because we've been conditioned to believe the best and safest care that I can get is only at a hospital, only from a doctor, only from someone who's been through, this type of schooling for this many years. And it's just, what I'm really starting to see is there's a divide between people who trust that and people who question that. And that's where there's like this polarized effect. But I wanted to bring up for the doulas who, because like you said, that we kind of depend on these letters behind our names to validate our work. And even I went through this, even just going through my doula training. My training was amazing, but it wasn't like nationally recognized type of certifying organization where people were like, oh, are you so-and-so certified?
Right.
I was not that so-and-so certified. I was something else.
Yeah.
And I was beginning to feel jaded because I'm like, people keep asking me if I certified through this organization, but the organization that I used was amazing.
Yeah.
And count for something, and you will see that in my work, and people see it in my work, but it's always a little kind of a bad taste in my mouth when people ask me about the whole certifying thing, because I'm like, do you even know what you're really asking?
Right.
Like, you know how big of a question that, like, I want to just give them a history lesson right there. But for doulas who feel that need to kind of, I'll say, specialize, or they're trying to find that thing that makes them more. Like, I see a lot of people who are like doulas and herbalists, doulas and aromatherapists, doulas and yoga instructors. What type of guidance, or just what can you say to that type of individual who feels like, I want to specialize more? Because we all can't do everything.
Right.
I see people attempting to, oh, I do yoga and I'm a aromatherapist and I da, and I'm like, no, you're not. You don't have enough time in the day to do all of those things. But yeah, how can we, I guess, hone in to our purpose, or what specialty really fits in the best with who we are?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, because I feel like so many people, I mean, myself included, right? It's like we're good at really great things. There's things that we really enjoy doing and that we want to bring into our work. And that also helps us to price ourselves differently from our competitors, right? When we have something else that creates like a little bit of a competitive edge. And so I think about like, you know, what is it that you really want to, like, what would be your ideal experience as a client? Like, what would you want? You know, like, oh, I want to have the herbalism, or I want to have the food, or I want to have the nutrition support. Like, thinking about all the things that you could do effectively that you could wrap into a service and package that, right? I think that that's great. I agree with you, like the multi-hyphenate thing, when it gets too much, people don't bite because they don't really know how to categorize you, right? So if it's like, you know, the sort of the lens is doula work, and part of that, here's my strategy and how I help, right? I do all these things. And so if you can find a way to bridge a couple things that you love and that you're really great at, and add that on as part of your service, that's amazing. You know, I do think that professional development is awesome. People should always try to learn more, you know, be better at skills, but also at business, right? Because more so than even like skills, like just understanding how to market yourself, how to position yourself, branding, the beauty of like, you know, whatever you post out into the world, like making sure that that stuff is reflective of like who you are and how you want the world to see you. That's important too. So I think like I'm a big fan, you know, of people just like finding things that they're good at that they want to bring into the work, and including that as part of a service offering, but being clear that you're not just, I just took a class 2 weeks ago, right? Like this has to be work that you're like deeply engaged in. Like I have, you know, my herbal background, I don't even really use that often in the births. I mean, obviously I do, but not like heavily, right? Like I'm not making all the tonics. I'm really more like suggesting things for people, but I could do that, but it's time consuming, right? So I don't do that. And there's instances where I do say, okay, I'll make this cream, or I'll make this salve, or I'll make this like nipple butter or something like that. But, you know, for the most part, it's like there's certain things that I can do very special that I'll bring to make the experience feel really special, right? So I'll make like a postpartum tonic for someone and they'll love that. And that's something I can do time-wise, and I can manage that, right? But I can't be, oh, I'm not going to have this apothecary. You have to choose, right? So it is about like, you know, how is my time best spent, right? Like what takes a lot of time, what takes the least amount, and what allows me to deliver the highest touch experience? Like how can I make it feel like I'm reaching out and touching you and I'm providing such value without having to like move mountains? That's really important, right? Because at the end of the day, we're mothers, we're care providers, we're wives, sisters, friends, daughters, nieces, and we have people that, you know, need us, and we have work obligations, we have things that we have to do that and even for ourselves, that takes a lot of energy to do certain things that you may not get credit for. And I always think about it like this, like think about like if I make a tincture, right? It takes a long time to make it, right? But if you buy it, you're not going to really appreciate that I made it, that it took me 4 weeks to make it, or maybe even 3 months to decant and all that. Like you might not appreciate that. If I make you homemade granola, which that you might appreciate that. Or if I, you know, maybe, write like a really special meal plan list for you, you might appreciate that, right? But it's like thinking about like, you know, if your kid has, you know, I don't know, like a little holiday party at school, are you making the cookies or buying the cookies? Like, it's probably easier to buy. You're not going to get credit for making the cookies. Like, nobody cares, right? So just like do the things you're going to get credit for. And I don't say that in a crass way, but in a way of like, make sure that there's high value attached to what you're going to do. Right. Otherwise, if people don't even realize it goes over their head, you put all that effort in and you're not really even being remembered or compensated or necessarily sort of categorized as somebody who provided this bespoke service, right? Or it's just this amazing thing. It was so awesome. Cool. But guess what? Like if you do that all the time and now you're depleted and your client doesn't even get that, like it took you 60 days to make this one product, like just buy it. You know what I'm saying? So think about like how you show up in the world with the work that you do and how much time it takes you to deliver that service or that offering, and what it takes for you to do that, and make sure you adequately charge for it so that you're compensated in a way that reflects what you have to put in work wise. But I love the idea of doulas bringing more than one service, because as you know, people have to then hire a yoga teacher or a nutritionist or an acupuncturist or a Reiki. Like they can just, if you do a couple of those things, that's awesome, because now they're paying just one person.
Right. And
You know.
so, and I also kind of heard you kind of alluding to like that equal energy exchange where does it make you feel good? Like, is this something that you really want to do? And I think
Yeah.
that takes, unfortunately, being in a capitalistic society, we don't have time to just like go off and think about stuff for a couple years. Like
Yeah.
we kind of have to make a decision. Like, am I going to do this to make money? Yes or no? And so I do respect the journey of like I tried this, but it didn't work out.
Mm.
But also being able to be honest with ourselves and say like I like this, but I don't love it enough that it's keeping me energized when I do it. And I especially see this as a doula myself, where I had to get real and say, okay, I cannot do births 12 months out of the year. Number one, I have anxiety from always being on call. Number two, like I'm tired of getting up in the middle of the night and it's cold outside. So I was just like, okay, I will take births in the spring and in the summer. I will feel good about it. I will have more help. And just that radical honesty of saying this ain't it. And the way I'm doing it is not it. So the last question I have for you before we close out, there's a lot of moms who want to become doulas or not yet mothers who want to become doulas. What kind of advice can you specifically give to the Black women or even the white women who consider themselves allies who want to become doulas because of the Black maternal mortality crisis? And in what ways can they help by becoming a doula? What ways can they help by doing something else?
Great question. Yeah. I mean, I think so many people have answered the call to do this work as a result of this amplification, news-wise, social media-wise, of the Black maternal health crisis in this country. Since it was first reported nationally, or we saw like the ProPublica piece and the New York Times piece, I believe in 2017, where they looked at the crisis. The CDC had reported then that Black women were 3 to 4 times more likely than white women to die during childbirth or due to childbirth-related causes. In 2019, that number went to 4 to 5 times. In places like New York City, that number is 12 times. In the UK, it's 4 to 5 times. So we know that anti-Blackness is global, right? So when we think about this work and understanding like our role, I think it's so powerful that you mentioned, you know, white women because, or people who carry white privilege, because when you're entering into the fold, you have a powerful opportunity and responsibility to really be a voice that can be heard by certain people, right? In certain settings. And it is about allyship, it is about advocacy, it is about education, it's about really understanding what experiences that occur to Black and brown women and how they are really unique to us, right? And being able to prepare yourself to serve, because again, I think so many people think about it like, well, you know, I mean, I'm probably not going to have that experience as a white woman, or, you know, I want to, or people come in like, I want to save the day. I want to like change and that also is dangerous, right? To come in and think that you have something that you can do to help, right? It's like we have our own solutions. It's about coming alongside, standing alongside, amplifying what we're doing, supporting us in the way that we want to be helped. That's really it. We don't need like nobody to come in, hey, have you thought of it? Girl, we thought of all of it. Just come help, like lick some envelopes or something. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like come alongside, hold hands, but like we are leading, get behind and get your hands dirty, right? So I think that is really important. That is what we've seen with the white women who've come to do our training, is that they enter a room where they're outnumbered, right? They're like actually the minority in the room, where Sometimes there's one white woman, sometimes there's up to 4. I think maybe there's been up to 4 in a room, but like maybe there's 1 or 2. And it's mostly Black and Latinx women, women from as far as like Tanzania, Uganda, Spain, France, Germany, China, Thailand. I mean, every continent represented outside of Antarctica. But, all of those people, from different countries who have a shared experience of living as a woman, and knowing that they also live in places where they are dealing with, the effects of white supremacy as well, right? Like we all, and patriarchy. And so I think it's important to have that allyship and that support, number one, right? And so I welcome people into the fold so that they can understand what it is to be in an experience where people of color are centered and the material centers us. Because what I believe is that, like, the folks who are most marginal, if we design for them, that we will be able to eradicate and address the issues in a salient way. It's like thinking about, the Disability Act. And what was so powerful about that is that when they put curb cuts and sidewalks, before that, people didn't want that, right? Like they were like, oh my God, you're gonna like cut up all the sidewalks, like that's crazy. But guess what it does? When you get to the edge of a sidewalk and you're in a wheelchair or you're on crutches, like that's like a life changing event for your day. Like that changes your day. Now you're trying to figure out how you're gonna get across the street. Putting a curb cut in the sidewalk changes your life. But guess who else's life it sort of helps, but they don't even realize it? The woman pushing her stroller, the woman pushing her groceries, the kid who's on a little tricycle crossing the street, like all of those people benefit from using the curb cut, but they don't need it. The person who needs it is who it was designed for, but it benefits all. So if we think about that type of design, right? Designing for Black women and brown women, because we know that Native women also have horrifying outcomes, right? Like they're alongside us in this crisis. And so designing for them and their needs, figuring out like, how do we address the systemic racism? How do we address the implicit bias? How do we also deconstruct a system that was built on these racist ideologies, right? So that's number one. And I think the other piece of it, is it is so important for us to feel like we are standing in the legacy of our ancestors and being taught that, not being taught that this work started, when, a couple white folks decided to retell a history around doula work and birth work. No, it started with our people, and look at the other things that they brought to the fold. They weren't just midwives, they were medicine women, and they were, herbalists, and they were, divination healers, they did all of that, they were seers, right? So it wasn't just like one little area. It wasn't like, how we evolved in our healing was never like there was one person that did one thing. That person did a lot of things. That person also was the wisdom keeper in the community that then caught the baby, right? So it's like that's why it also feels very, I think, it feels warm for many people to find the healing modalities and pull that into their doula work, because that's ancestrally what we did, right? Like we did a lot of things.
It wasn't isolated.
But exactly. That's exactly right. So it wasn't like, okay, we do this, it was not this, because that is not how we work. We're inclusive, we pull all the things, right? So versus, the dominant culture, which is about isolation, putting things in boxes and codifying things, right? And separating them out and extracting them from where they came from to deliver them someplace else, right? So this is a system that also wants you to go to work 10 days after having your baby, extract your milk from your breast, put it, through a pump, put it into a bottle or whatever, sleeves, store that in the refrigerator, then take that home to your baby to put into a bottle for somebody else to feed your baby, rather than you stay home and feed your baby. And then you
And
have to
when
pay
you
that person.
say it like that, when you put it like that, it begins to dissolve this narrative of us versus them, breastfeeding moms versus pumping moms versus formula moms. It begins to dissolve that. And I remember hearing, um, I can't remember her name. I can't remember her name, but she basically was saying how when you separate a baby from their mother in the beginning, the only biological way that that baby reads that is that the mother has died.
Yes.
And so it's, what the heck is the implications of biologically separating mother and baby so early, not just in the birth space, but then in the postpartum?
Yes.
It's crazy.
It is traumatic. A baby imagines it cannot survive without that buffering presence of an adult, preferably its mother. The person that it smells, the people that it smells first and closest to, right? The baby doesn't, it's an animal. We're animals, right? It's not like reasoning. It's like, yo, where is the adult? And
Right.
so that is early trauma, right? Which impedes on growth, which impedes on emotional development and stuff like that. So it is so critically important for that closeness. I love that your shirt says breast milk. It is so critically important, right, to have that closeness.
Yeah.
And that is, again, going back to your question about, like, us reclaiming our tools and doula work, it's us reclaiming these practices, because yes, our ancestors were denied the opportunity to breastfeed their babies in peace, to be with their children, to not be separated from their children, to not have their children be sold away from them. Like, today we don't have to worry about, like, our children being separated in that same way, but we have to worry about our children being attacked violently through like mass gun stuff happening in schools. We have to worry about, like, bullying. We have to worry about the the police.
I'm gonna have to run and get my charger, so I'm gonna pause this really quick.
Okay.
I'm just gonna pause the recording. Okay, so we had to pause really quickly, but you were just wrapping up your thoughts on doulas choosing the pathway to help with the maternal mortality crisis, either through
Yeah.
work or through other means, and just knowing that you don't have to become a doula to help with this issue.
Yeah. And I think that, again, people always think about it like they go to a really beautiful ballet production. It's like, oh, I should be dancing. It's like, you can just appreciate that was amazing. You don't have to now, right? So it's like, you can appreciate the work that's being done by people who are on the front lines of addressing the issue. You can support them. I think a couple things could be happening that I would like to see more of. People always say, oh, what can I do? Well, there's incredible people who want to go to school for midwifery. You can support them in education, right? There's education funds. Some people have their own, but you can also find out what schools have education funds, particularly for people of color, so that you can have more Black and brown midwives educated. You can donate to support doula education for those who want to do trainings, but the trainings are cost prohibitive for them. You can support by putting money towards or paying for the doula service of folks that you care about or love or are friends with. You can also support the folks that that are birth workers. It can be in the form of a talk. It could be like having them come into your organization and share information, updated resources on what's happening in the crisis, but also what a doula could do to sort of support them as they take this journey. It could be through panels. It could be through podcasts. It could be like, there's a lot of ways that you could be helpful in disseminating information and using the tools that you have access to. So it doesn't have to be that it's that you're going out and doing this work necessarily as a doula. You can be a mouthpiece as a person who has a voice, right? And as a person who sees this issue as a human rights issue, as a reproductive justice issue, not as a Black issue. It's an issue for all of us. And so I would like to see that. And I think, policymakers, people who are making policy, people who are, in popular culture. I mean, there's so many things you can do TV and write and sit in the writer's room and deliver some, really poignant information about how to create an episode of television that centers a crisis. And we've seen that through, Charles Johnson and his wife, Kira Johnson's story that they did on The Resident. Like there's a lot of ways that you can use your power, as a journalist. If you're there, you can use your power to write. But most importantly, I would like for Black women to tell their own stories, people who have had positive experiences, people who have had traumatic experiences, people who have had no experiences but are just trying to figure it all out, to tell their stories, to center us in the equation, and also to bring it back to joy. Because for me, as we talk about birth and think the reason why I know that I was empowered and inspired to do this work was because of joy, because of the incredible experience that I had of my ancestors visiting me during my son's birth. It's that I want people to be able to reclaim. And I want us to be able to reconfigure the nerves that we have around this anxiety of being neglected, of being not seen, not heard, not listened to, not loved, not valued, seen as property or seen as objects, but not as people, seen as not having sensation or feeling, like that we can move through the pain of that and come onto the other side and know that we have inherently so much power, right? And that we are born with and endowed with so much power, and that when we go through these transformative experiences, our ancestors show up. And so it's not, I'm not giving birth, we're giving birth. Yeah. We are together in this. And so to call upon those tools that are inside of each of us, and to know that we have access to those tools, I want everybody to start exploring that, because that's encoded in us. That is our magic. And that's what's been sort of, that was what they were beating out of us. That was what they were trying to get us to not talk about when we were coming up with all these schemes and when we were developing culture and language. This was what they were trying to keep us from, is this inherent magic and wisdom and connection to spirit. Like that is who we are as well, right? We are not just the sum of experiences of trauma. We are magical, right? And so I want us to be able to lean into that more, and stand tall, rather, not even lean in, stand tall in the power of who we are as people, and find what works for you. So find, if you feel called to do a training, absolutely. It might just be to do that for your own healing, not necessarily to become a doula, right? So don't get attached to, I'm going to go do this. Get attached to, I'm doing this for myself, and then I'm going to metabolize this experience and figure out how it shows up in the world. Does it show up in journalism, in doula work? Does it show up in, me healing myself, in my relationship with my mother? Does it, like, how does it show up for me, right? And do that work for yourself. Black women and brown women, do that work for yourself, right? Because everybody is asking us for our support, and everybody wants us to heal them, right? And help them. But let's do this for ourselves. Do this work for yourself. And then after you've done that work, and let it come to the surface for you, what it is that you will do with it and how it will show up to the world through you. Because we will undoubtedly be able to use these tools to educate and to impact and to change what's happening in the face of this crisis. But I don't want us to lead with fear. I want us to lead with joy, and know that that's like, in the most traumatic points of our history, where we see and hear about, like, our ancestors in the fields, like doing breakbacking work and, with bloodied hands and picking cotton, that they were also singing. You know what I mean? Like, we need to, while we're experiencing this trauma and this pain and living through what looks like a nightmare, that we need to reclaim our joy. Yeah. And that's what I really want to make sure that we center.
Okay. That was powerful. That was
Um,
I really I really hope that people can fully receive like all of the energy that has circulated in this conversation, because I mean, there were so many things that we talked about that have been just kind of brewing inside of me, and it
mm,
felt like, how do I say all of these things and how do I articulate it? And it just flowed out so naturally through this conversation in a way that I feel like was perfect. So
thank
thank you.
you.
No, thank
Thank you too.
you. Thank you so much. So if you could let us know where people can find you, either website, Instagram, social media, both for your services and just for whatever else you offer.
Sure. Yeah. So on Instagram, my personal account is Glowmaven, GLOWMAVEN. On the interwebs, we have mamaglow.com. It's MAMAGLOW.com. And we also have Mama Glow on Instagram, same handle. And yeah, I don't really do Twitter, but I'm there, I guess. I don't know. I have one, but that's Glow Maven. And I think, we have a conference that's centered around women's health, fertility, pregnancy, new motherhood, and everything in between. It's called the Continuum. And it's coming this October. So we'd love for folks to show up. There's early bird tickets and stuff on sale. So the continuumconference.com, but yeah, like we have the doula training. So if you go to my website, if you go to Mama Glow, if you go to my link in bio, you'll see all that kind of stuff that I'm up to. And then I have like some retreats coming up and other things personally that are around some of these topics we've talked about. But all that stuff can be found in those places. And I think I just want to acknowledge you for your efforts, and thank you, Olivia, for this beautiful morning together. And yeah, for like answering the call yourself. You could be doing other things. You could certainly be balancing your time differently, but you chose to like do this and to put your efforts towards supporting and amplifying voices of folks who are doing work. And I think also too, like being a model for behavior we'd like to see more of, right? Like we'd like to see more collaborative support of sisters who are doing work together. We see it in every other space. And so for you to have called that out, but also not to have just called it out, to be doing that, to be saying, I'm going to bring people, to the fold who are doing the work for us to have conversations around solutions together and not like in silos, is really important. So thank you too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So with that, we're going to close out. I will make sure to link all of your information down below in the description box, or wherever this is going to be posted, you'll be able to find her information. And definitely make sure that you follow, like, share, subscribe, all the things, hit all the buttons, so that we can continue to spread this message. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next Doula Talk. All right, so I'm going to